I've known AVID for quite a long time now, for many years, and maybe like yourself, I've known AVID as a turntable creator, turntable designer, manufacturer, and they've produced some beautiful turntables over the years. But as those years have progressed, they have developed and produced some excellent electronics, a wide variety of amplifiers and cartridges and a whole host of stuff. And they're continuing to do that. There's a tone arm on the way. You may have seen some speakers already reviewed elsewhere. They're very much involved in new hi-fi products. And this particular product, the Sigsum, the AVID Sigsum, is an integrated amplifier. It offers 110 watts into 8 ohms, and it's a big thing. It's a big chassis, solid state amplifier. On a typical hi-fi shelf, it'll fill the entire space, 60 centimeters wide, so you're going to fill that entire space. It's deceptively heavy as well. You wouldn't think by looking at it that it is so heavy. It's not small by any means. As I say, it fills up a shelf, but I opened up the box just to take the thing out, just to have a cursory look at it, bent over to pick the amplifier out of its box, put myself in the typical hi-fi journalist strain position, and nothing happened. I didn't move. Why? Because this thing is over 31 kilograms heavy, and I didn't realize it was over 31 kilograms heavy, so nothing actually happened. I was in this frozen position for a good few long seconds, and then I had to call somebody else for help, because on this particular amplifier, I would encourage you to put your testosterone back in the bottle and phone a friend, because you're going to need to protect yourself from a hernia on this one. The reason mainly is because of the whopping great big transformer inside. Well, there's two, but we'll get to that in a second. But the whopping great big one is the one that provides a lot of the weight on this particular amplifier. So on the front, you'll find an Alps RK50 volume knob, which is a beautiful thing in itself, a selector switch for different inputs, a mute, also mono switch, which is also very useful, and a headphone socket, which handles between 20 and 600 ohms. If you spin the whole thing around and look at the rear, you'll also see two pairs of RCA inputs. Under the RCA pair, you'll also find a pair of XLR inputs too. There's another pair of RCAs which also act as preamp outputs. And to be honest with you, I see them as being superfluous. I really don't see why they're there, not at the price. This is a high-end amplifier, and we're looking at £13,000 here for this particular amplifier. As I say, this is a high-end machine. I personally don't see why you need preamps on such a high-end machine. For me, preamp outputs are very useful. If you've got yourself an amplifier, you're on a budget, you can't afford to buy a separate preamp, you've got yourself a power amp, you hook up the power amp to the integrated preamps. So the integrated forms a sort of pseudo preamp hooking up to your new power amps. And that's fine. That's fine as a temporary measure. The integrated will never be as good as a proper preamp because it has all of that extra technology around. The sound will never be as pure as a dedicated preamp. So to see a £13,000 amplifier and integrated with preamps insinuates that the Sigsum is some sort of stepping stone to bigger and brighter things further down the line. And for that price, I wouldn't have put it in that role. I would see you going for a Sigsum and that's it. End of story. Or you go for a Sigsum, you've got a massive budget, and then you move on from the Sigsum and you buy yourself a dedicated pre and a dedicated power. So it's slightly incongruous to see the preamp outputs on the back of the Sigsum. Personally, I would have liked to have seen more inputs, and the amount of inputs on the rear of the Sigsum for me is a bit low. Having two pairs of RCAs and two pairs of balanced is all very well and good, but I would have liked to have seen 3, 4, even 5, probably at the minimum 4 sets of RCAs and similarly 4 sets of balanced inputs too. I had a word with AVID about this because I did ask them why this was so. And they talked about budget and the fact that they were trying to, even the £13,000, they had to watch the pennies because they've got some high quality components in this particular model. So if they added more inputs, the price would have gone up, and that's fine, that's fine. But when you see the pre's, those pre-outs, you wonder, you think, a bit of a shame, I would have swapped those 2 pre-outs for a couple more inputs. But I'm being slightly picky here. I only mention this because I want you to look carefully at the rear of the Sigsum if you're thinking about buying this particular amp. And just make sure that you have enough inputs for the rest of your hi-fi. So on to the sound test. And the first item I want to bring up is the Phono amplifier. Now I haven't listed this in the techie rundown yet. I thought I'd mention it now. It might seem a little bit weird that the first thing in the sound test I talk about is the Phono amplifier. But in this particular case, there's a very good reason. And it's this. In the majority of cases, whenever I've done a test for an integrated amplifier, and there's a Phono amplifier built into the chassis, it's all part of the same thing. The majority of those tests, the Phono amplifier sounds fine. In some cases, the Phono amplifier sounds awful, poor, struggling, lacking in detail, transparency, and the rest. On many cases, it sounds fine. It'll do until you can afford to buy an external model. There are very few cases where I can point to a Phono amplifier built into an integrated amplifier chassis and say, I like it, that sounds great. Well folks, in the AVID Sigsum, that is such a case. It's such a rarity. I can only think of one more. Really? Yes. I can think of one other example in my entire career as a journalist where I can point to the Phono amplifier and say, that's a cracking Phono amplifier. Well, this is number 2. And there's a good reason for it. Firstly, you are getting actually an AVID Pulsus. Now, an AVID Pulsus Phono amplifier is a product unto its own. It's a separate product which has been pushed into the Sigsum's chassis. The Pulsus, as I say, is an item which is sold independently in its own chassis, and it's priced around £1,800. So it's quite an expensive product in its own right. So basically, AVID has taken this Pulsus Phono amplifier, taken the chassis off the outside, put the guts of the Pulsus inside the Sigsum's chassis. And it's been very careful. It's been very careful in terms of isolation. The big problem with Phono amplifiers being in a bigger integrated chassis is electrical interference. All those capacitor noise and the resistor noise, and especially the noise from the transformer or other power supplies, they leach and leak over into the Phono amplifier. They infuse that Phono amplifier with high frequency noise. They mask detail and they ruin sound quality. That normally happens, and that's why I'm never a big fan of any Phono amplifier being included in anything, whether it's inside a turntable or inside an amplifier or inside anything, powered speakers, whatever. I much prefer Phono amplifiers being separate in their own chassis, away from an integrated amplifier. I want to get rid of the high frequency noise. I want to lower the noise floor. I want to increase detail and clarity from a Phono amplifier. With the AVID Sigsum, weirdly, that wasn't a problem. And it wasn't weird, actually, when you look at the detail. As I say, AVID has gone to great lengths to separate and isolate the Phono amplifier from the rest of the main amplifier. So, to an extent, that the Pulsus Phono amplifier, when it's in that chassis, has its own dedicated power supply. It doesn't even share the power supply of the rest of the amplifier. Now I go on about this because having a good quality Phono amplifier is almost symbolic. It's such a rare thing to do. It's such a rare thing to achieve that when you do have a great sounding Phono amp in something like this Sigsum, it gives an indication to what else is going on. It gives an indication to the standard of design and the standard of manufacture. It gives an indication of the quality of the entire product. just by focusing on the little old Phono amplifier. And that is the case when you look at the rest of the design of the Sigsum. It's a cracking amplifier. This is a solid state amplifier, no tubes, valves, whatever. This is a full-blown solid state amp. And the first thing that hits me when I'm listening to the Sigsum is how clean. It's such a clean sound. There's not a speck of dust on the soundstage. Everything sounds scrubbed. It sounds like all the cleaners have been in the night before, they've scrubbed and they've polished the studio, and it's shining and it's spotless, and there's no bits of paper being chucked in the corner, and there's no fingerprints on anything. It sounds absolutely pristine. That's how the Sigsum sounds. That's the first impression you get when you listen to this amplifier. And also, just because I say it's £13,000 and you think, oh, blimey, well, £13,000 is bound to be wonderful. That's not always the case. Just because something is expensive, it doesn't mean it's going to be great. And this is why I'm in a job. Because I have heard expensive kit out there, which should be great. You're paying enough money for it to be great, and it can sound, or even just downright disappointing. That's not the case with the AVID Sigsum. It's worth every penny, let me tell you. The other big thing that really impressed me right from the beginning was how at ease this amplifier was. It did everything with no effort at all. I mean, none. Zero. It flowed very easily. Music had a portent, it had a grunt, it had power, but it didn't have to show it. You knew it was there. It was going to be used if necessary. And just knowing it was there, you could sort of sense this power was in the background, lurking like a wolf. It was there. Whether you're talking rock or whether you're talking jazz, the musicians within each genre performed with such ease, and they were so relaxed in what they did, and they sounded so confident. But there was also space around all the musicians. You never felt they were bumping elbows or knocking into each other. Sometimes a soundstage can give a very cramped sort of, everyone's falling over each other. With the AVID, it never felt like that. This portent, this power in the background, this ease in which music flowed very easily, the space between the musicians. There was a massive confidence in how the music was portrayed and presented to the ear. And overall, I'd say the soundstage has a very neutral aspect to it, low in noise and high in detail. But whereas with some cheaper amplifiers, which have to rely on a little bit of mid-range emphasis to really bring in that fine detail, the Sigsum never had to stoop to those levels. There was enough quality to bring out the detail naturally. So for example, I played a little bit of jazz and there was a particular trumpet solo, and you never felt that there was any brittleness in that solo. You knew that this instrument was made out of metal, but there was never any harshness there. There was never any bite, never anything to make you go, none of that. It was very easy, and there was an organic element to the trumpet too. You felt that there was a human being behind this thing. You never felt that it was hooked up to a machine or that a computer was synthesizing the actual noise. It felt quite organic in that way. And thus far I had played the Sigsum via a vinyl source, a high-end turntable, mind you. But even so, this was through the RCA connection. I then wanted to test the balanced inputs. So I disconnected my turntable and I added a CD player, in this case a high-end CD player, a Macintosh MCD 600, which I've reviewed on this channel, and I'll put a link up there if you'd like to have a little look at that. But what I did, I used the Macintosh to connect to the Sigsum's balanced ports, and then I played a little bit of acoustic guitar just to see how it coped with the detail. Bottom line, incredible. Way better than the RCA connections, and the RCA connections were excellent on their own, but the balanced, whoa, just took the detail and the quality of music off the scale. Excellent, superb. If you're going to buy a Sigsum, make sure you go for balanced inputs, if at all possible. You'll get some great response, you'll get some great sound quality from single-ended RCAs. But if you can, go for the balanced connections. It will increase the level of detail by a magnitude. You almost felt as if you were wandering around the studio itself and you were hearing the instruments and the player from every angle. You felt as though you were losing nothing. But again, there was no unnatural emphasis here. It was all very organic. Tonally, it was right on point. This was a tonally accurate performance. Mid-range was transparent and naturalistic in tone, and bass itself was organic without being emphasized in any way, shape or form. I then finished the sound tests by having a quick listen to the built-in headphone amplifier, which used a full-size 6.35mm socket, and I was very happy with that. Again, bass was quite strong through this particular headphone amp, but there was lots of detail as well. In conclusion, before you buy, just flip the amplifier around, make sure you've got all the inputs you need, and when everything's connected, you'll have a whale of a time. The single-ended RCAs are excellent in terms of sound quality, but it's the balanced inputs which really are the stars of this particular show. Highly recommended indeed. This is an excellent amplifier. Thumbs up all around. And that's me done for this particular review. Don't forget, check out my Patreon page. I'll put a link below. Also, there's a link for a Facebook group, which I'm currently running, and my site. And there's a few other social media links, which I'll also list down below as well. Just to say thank you for watching this particular video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, bye bye for now.